"Her condition is worsening, Mr. Grant," Dr. Alara Vance had told him just an hour ago, her voice soft but firm. "We need to move forward with the surgery." She had paused then, her gaze full of a sympathy that felt more like a judgment. "Haven't you managed to raise the money yet?" The question hung in the sterile air, a weight Thomas Grant couldn't push away. He hadn't answered. He just nodded, his throat too tight to speak, before walking out into the cold afternoon. Now, that question echoed with every pull of the bow across the strings of his worn violin. It was in the mournful notes of the lullaby his own mother had hummed to him, the same one he now poured all his love and fear for his daughter into. He stood on the wind-whipped corner outside the hospital, his eyes closed, picturing Cora's small hand in his, her breaths shallow but steady in her hospital bed. He played with a desperation that vibrated through the melody, a silent plea for the miracle she needed. He didn't notice the sleek, black limousine that pulled to the curb, its tinted windows hiding the gaze of its passenger. He didn't see the elegant, powerful woman inside, her face pale, her own world suddenly paused. Rachel Davenport, the billionaire CEO, heard the music and her breath hitched. It was that song, the one from her childhood, the one her mother loved, the one he used to play, a ghost from her past, brought back to life on a street corner. The violin sang of sorrow and love, a single father's desperate, unanswered prayer. Unseen by Thomas, Rachel's hand slowly reached for the car door, her eyes fixed on the man, a man who was entirely unaware that the most powerful woman in the city was listening, and that the forgotten echoes of their shared past were about to collide with his daughter's precarious future. Inside the car, the world had gone silent for Rachel. The hum of the engine, the quiet instructions from her driver, the traffic of the city, it all vanished, replaced by the ghost of a melody played on a cheap, battered violin 23 years ago. She saw a small, cluttered apartment that always smelled of rain and old books. She saw her mother, frail and pale, smiling from a worn armchair as a boy with earnest brown eyes and a shy smile played this exact song. His name was Thomas. He had been her only friend in a world that had shrunk to the size of her mother's illness. "Ma'am," her driver, Arthur, said, his voice cutting through the fog of her memory. "We're going to be late for the board meeting." Rachel didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the man outside. It couldn't be him. The boy she knew was lanky and carefree, despite the sadness that sometimes clouded his eyes. This man was weathered. There were lines of exhaustion etched around his mouth, a deep-set weariness in the way he held his shoulders. But the eyes, when he briefly opened them, were the same deep, kind brown. And the way his fingers moved over the violin's neck with a familiar, gentle certainty, it was him. "Stop the car," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Here, ma'am?" Arthur asked, surprised. "Yes, here." The car glided to a silent stop. For a moment, Rachel just watched. She saw the open violin case at his feet, sparsely populated with a few crumpled dollar bills and some loose change. She saw the frayed cuffs of his jacket, the worn soles of his shoes. This wasn't a man playing for art. This was a man playing to survive. Every note was a plea. A memory, sharp and painful, surfaced. Her own father, years ago, selling his watch to pay for a doctor's visit. The shame, the desperation. It was all there, in this man's music. Taking a steadying breath, she pushed the door open. The city's cold air hit her, but she barely felt it. She walked toward him, her expensive heels clicking softly on the pavement, a sound completely alien to the raw emotion of his music. Thomas felt a shift in the air before he saw her. The music faltered for a second as he opened his eyes. A woman was standing before him, her presence so commanding it seemed to bend the very space around her. She was tall, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored coat that probably cost more than his car. Her face was striking, with sharp, intelligent features and eyes that seemed to see right through him. He immediately looked down at his violin case, assuming she was about to drop a bill in. He braced himself for the familiar mix of pity and dismissal. "That melody," she said, her voice crisp and clear, devoid of pity. "Where did you learn it?" The question caught him off guard. No one ever asked about the music. They just dropped their change and moved on. "It's an old song," he stammered, his bow hovering over the strings. "A family thing." Rachel's gaze was intense. "I haven't heard it in a very long time." He gave a slight, tired nod, unsure what she wanted. He needed to keep playing. Every silent moment was a moment he wasn't earning money for Cora. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I have to—" "I'm Rachel Davenport," she said, cutting him off. Not with rudeness, but with an authority that was impossible to ignore. She extended a gloved hand. He hesitated, looking at his own calloused fingers, then reluctantly shook it. Her grip was firm. "I am the head of the Davenport Foundation. We're hosting our annual charity gala in 2 weeks." Thomas stared at her, confused. The Davenport Foundation. He'd heard of it. They were a major benefactor of the very hospital where Cora was a patient. "Your music is affecting," she continued, choosing her words carefully. She couldn't let on that she knew him. The shock was still too raw, the questions too numerous. What had happened to him? Why was he here? "I want to hire you to perform at the gala." One song. That song Thomas's mind reeled. A gala? Him. He looked down at his worn clothes, then back at the Billionaire CEO. This had to be a joke, a cruel prank. "Ma'am, I think you have the wrong person. I'm not a professional musician. I just play out here. I'm not looking for a concert violinist," Rachel said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I'm looking for that sound, that feeling. It's what our donors need to hear." She saw the doubt and fear warring in his eyes, the look of a man who had been kicked by the world too many times to trust a helping hand. "I will pay you $25,000. The number hit Thomas like a physical blow. He swayed slightly, his knuckles white where he gripped his violin. $25,000. It wasn't the full amount for the surgery, but it was more than half. It was a lifetime. It was hope. It was a chance for Cora. "Why?" he whispered, the single word filled with a universe of disbelief. Rachel held his gaze. She couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. She couldn't say, "Because 23 years ago, you were the only person who was kind to me when my world was ending, and I never forgot." So, she gave him a different truth. "Because I believe your music can make a difference, and because, from the look of things, you could use the opportunity." He swallowed hard, the raw truth of her words stinging more than any insult. He looked from her sharp, determined face to the cold, imposing walls of the hospital behind him. Inside, his daughter was fighting for her life. And outside, a ghost from a past he couldn't remember was offering him a lifeline. He had no choice but to take it. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible over the city traffic. "I'll do it." Rachel gave a curt nod, a mask of professionalism hiding the storm of emotion inside her. "My assistant will be in touch to arrange the details." She turned and walked back to her car, her posture erect, every inch the powerful CEO. But as the door closed and the limousine pulled away, she finally allowed herself to lean back against the plush leather, her eyes closing as the last fading notes of his violin echoed in her memory. She had found him. After all these years, she had found him. And his life was a wreck. A storm of questions brewed in her mind, but one thought rose above the rest, sharp and clear. She had to help him, and she couldn't let him know why. Not yet. The moment the black car disappeared around the corner, the bubble of surreal silence around Thomas burst. The city's noise rushed back in, horns blaring, sirens wailing in the distance, the chatter of people passing by. He stood frozen for a long moment, the violin still clutched in his hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. $25,000? The number was an absurdity. It was a fantasy, a cruel joke waiting for a punchline. But the woman, Rachel Davenport, had not seemed like she was joking. Her eyes had been sharp, serious, and held a depth he couldn't quite fathom. He fumbled to pack his violin, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline and disbelief. The few crumpled bills in his case seemed pathetic now, remnants of a life he might be about to leave behind. He had to see Cora. He needed to see her, to ground himself, to remember why he just said yes to a billionaire in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. When he entered Cora's room, she was awake, propped up against a pile of pillows, a coloring book laid open on her lap. Her face, usually pale, brightened the moment she saw him. "Daddy, did you play the sleepy song today?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. "I did, sweet pea," he said, forcing a smile as he sat on the edge of her bed. Lots of people heard it. Her eyes, a mirror of his own, searched his face. At 8 years old, she was already far too perceptive. She knew the weight of his smiles, the effort behind his cheerfulness. Did they like it? Did they put lots of money in your case? He took her small hand in his, feeling the familiar, faint flutter of her pulse. Something even better happened, Cora. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the whole truth. Hope was a fragile thing, and he didn't want to give her a version that could be snatched away. "A very nice lady heard the music, and she wants me to play at a big party." "A really big one?" Cora's eyes widened. "Like a birthday party." "Bigger," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And she's going to pay me for it. Enough to help the doctors make your heart all better." A real, genuine smile spread across her face, and for a moment, she looked like any other healthy, happy kid. That smile was all the confirmation he needed. He had made the right decision. Whatever came next, he would face it for that smile. Meanwhile, on the 81st floor of the Davenport Tower, Rachel was failing spectacularly at focusing. The quarterly earnings report was projected on the screen in front of her, a sea of encouraging green arrows and positive percentages, but all she saw was the worn collar of Thomas Grant's jacket. And as you can see, our strategic acquisitions in the biotech sector have yielded a 14% growth margin, exceeding all projections, her CFO was saying. Rachel nodded, her gaze distant. "Rachel, do you have any thoughts on the Q4 rollout?" The voice, smooth and laced with a subtle challenge, belonged to Gregory Ashcroft. He sat opposite her at the long mahogany table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit immaculate. He had been her father's right-hand man, her mentor. Now he was the only person on the board who dared to question her, his every word a reminder that he believed he should be the one sitting in her chair. "The rollout looks aggressive, Mark," she said, her voice steady as she met Gregory's gaze. "I like it." Gregory offered a thin, knowing smile. "You seem distracted today, Rachel. Everything all right?" The question was a probe, disguised as concern. He knew her better than anyone. He knew when her armor had a crack. "Everything is fine, Gregory," she replied, her tone cool and dismissive. "I was just considering a new angle for the Foundation's gala." This piqued his interest. "Oh? I thought we had secured the Philharmonic Quartet." "We have," Rachel said, leaning forward, her focus sharpening. She would use the truth as her shield. "But I've decided to add a special solo performance, a street musician I happened to hear today. His sound is authentic. It will resonate with our donors in a way the quartet never could." A murmur went around the table. Gregory's eyebrows rose. "A street musician? That's a risky move, Rachel. The gala is our most prestigious event. We have a reputation to uphold. Our reputation is built on helping people, Gregory, not on being predictable." She shot back, a flinty edge to her voice. "This man's music tells a story of struggle and hope. It's the very reason the Foundation exists. He will perform." Her tone was final. The discussion was over. Gregory leaned back in his chair, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He was intrigued and a little suspicious. Rachel was many things, brilliant, ruthless, driven, but she was never impulsive. For her to be this adamant about a random musician she'd seen on the street, it was out of character. It was a thread, and Gregory Ashcroft was a man who knew exactly what to do with a thread. He would pull on it. Later that evening, Thomas was washing dishes in his small, cramped apartment when his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered hesitantly. "Is this Thomas Grant?" A crisp, professional voice asked. "Yes." "My name is Amelia Vance. I am the executive assistant to Miss Rachel Davenport. I'm calling to schedule your preliminary meeting regarding your performance at the Davenport Foundation Gala. The voice was so formal, so disconnected from the raw reality of his life, that it felt like a call from another planet. "Oh, okay," Thomas said, drying his hands on his jeans. "Ms. Davenport would like to see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the Davenport Tower. Will that time work for you?" 10 a.m. That was Cora's physical therapy hour, but he couldn't say no. He couldn't afford to. "Yes, that's fine. I'll be there. Very good. Please bring your instrument. You'll check in at the main security desk in the lobby. They will have a visitor's pass for you." The line went dead. Thomas stared at his phone, then looked around his tiny living room. His gaze fell on the clothes hanging to dry over a chair, his janitor's uniform and a couple of worn flannel shirts. What was he supposed to wear to a meeting with a billionaire? The thought filled him with a cold dread. He was a janitor, a street performer. He was about to walk into the lion's den, and he didn't even own a decent pair of shoes. The $25,000 lifeline suddenly felt like an anchor, pulling him into waters far too deep for him to navigate. The next morning, Thomas stood in front of the small, cracked mirror in his bathroom, a stranger staring back at him. He had spent an hour deciding what to wear, a futile exercise when his entire wardrobe consisted of 2 pairs of jeans, a few worn shirts, and his janitor's uniform. He finally settled on his newest pair of jeans, the ones without any visible fraying, and a dark gray button-down shirt he'd bought from a thrift store years ago. He had ironed it twice, but it still looked tired, just like him. His shoes were scuffed, but he'd polished them until his arm ached. It was the best he could do. He'd had to make a desperate call to his neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kindly old woman who often watched Cora for an hour or two, bribing her with the promise of a home-cooked meal to take her to physical therapy. The lie felt heavy in his gut, but the truth was too complicated, too fragile to share. Walking into the lobby of the Davenport Tower was like stepping into another dimension. The floors were a gleaming black marble that reflected the soaring, cathedral-like ceiling. A massive, abstract sculpture of bronze and steel stood in the center, and the air was still and cool, smelling faintly of citrus and money. Men and women in sharp, expensive suits moved with a brisk, silent purpose, their faces set with a uniform seriousness. Thomas clutched his violin case, feeling like a ghost, an intruder in this temple of wealth and power. At the security desk, a guard with an impassive face checked his ID. "Thomas Grant?" "For Miss Davenport. 80th floor." The guard handed him a visitor's pass and gestured toward a sleek bank of elevators. "Take the express elevator on the right." The ride up was silent and dizzyingly fast. His ears popped as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened, they did so onto a silent, plushly carpeted hallway. A woman with a sleek blonde bob and an impeccably professional smile was waiting for him. "Mr. Grant, I'm Amelia Vance. We spoke on the phone. Please, come this way." She led him to a set of imposing double doors and opened one for him. "Miss Davenport will be right with you." Rachel's office was less an office and more a kingdom. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. The hospital where Cora lay was a tiny, insignificant block somewhere down below. A massive desk, carved from a single piece of dark wood, sat in the center of the room, looking more like a monument than a piece of furniture. Rachel was standing by the window, her back to him, a phone pressed to her ear. She was dressed in a sharp, navy blue dress that bespoke effortless power. She gestured for him to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk, not missing a beat in her conversation. "No, the deal is non-negotiable," she was saying, her voice calm and cold as ice. "If they can't meet our terms by noon, we walk. Liquidate the assets. I don't care what it takes." She listened for a moment, then said, "Good," and hung up. She turned to face him, and the icy CEO persona melted away slightly, replaced by the cool, appraising look she'd given him on the street. "Mr. Grant, thank you for coming." "Of course, Miss Davenport," he said. his voice sounding rough and out of place in the pristine silence. "I trust the arrangements are to your satisfaction," she asked, taking her seat behind the desk. Amelia sat discreetly in a chair to the side, a notebook open and ready. The payment you mentioned is more than generous," he stammered. "It's a fair price for the value you will bring to the event," she said, her tone all business. It was a clear message. This was a transaction, not charity. "Before we proceed with the contract, I'd like you to play for me again." Here. Now Thomas's heart leaped into his throat. Play? In this sterile, silent room, under her intense gaze? His hands felt clumsy and slick with sweat as he opened his violin case. He lifted the instrument, settling it into the familiar curve of his shoulder. He took a deep, shaky breath, closed his eyes, and thought of Cora. He thought of her smile, of the way her small hand fit in his, and then he began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, thin and fragile in the vast space. But then the music found him. The melody poured out, no longer just a song of desperation, but of memory, of a love that was fierce and unwavering. It filled the office, clinging to the glass walls and wooden desk, transforming the cold, corporate space into something sacred and deeply human. It was the sound of a father's heart breaking and mending all at once. When he finished, the silence that followed was profound. He opened his eyes. Amelia, the professional assistant, was staring at him, her pen forgotten, her eyes wide. Rachel was motionless, her expression unreadable, but there was a telltale shimmer in her eyes, a vulnerability she quickly masked. She cleared her throat. "That will be more than adequate." She gave a curt nod to Amelia, who seemed to shake herself from a trance and slid a folder across the desk. "This is your contract," Rachel said. "It outlines the terms of your performance, a single song at the gala. It also includes a clause for a potential artist-in-residence position with the foundation, should your performance be well received. The payment of $25,000 will be made in two parts, $10,000 as an advance upon signing, and the remainder upon completion of your performance." $10,000. Now, the word echoed in his head. That was enough to get the process started, enough to schedule the surgery. He barely read the document before signing his name on the line Amelia indicated. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling impossibly small. "You have no idea what this means." "I think I do, Mr. Grant," she replied, her voice softer than he'd heard it before. As Amelia escorted him out, the double doors opened and a man stepped into the hallway, nearly colliding with them. It was the man from the boardroom, Gregory Ashcroft. He stopped, his gaze sweeping over Thomas's worn clothes and scuffed shoes before landing on the violin case. A slow, condescending smile touched his lips. "Ah," he said, his voice a low purr. "You must be the new protégé. Rachel has been singing your praises. We're all very interested to see what kind of magic a street corner virtuoso can produce." The words were a slap in the face, each one dripping with sarcasm and disdain. Thomas felt his face flush with heat. He didn't know who this man was, but he knew an enemy when he saw one. "Gregory!" Rachel's voice cut through the tension, sharp as glass, from her office doorway. "Do you need something?" Gregory's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just welcoming the new talent, Rachel. Making him feel part of the family." He gave Thomas a final, dismissive look, and then swept past him into the office. Amelia led a shaken Thomas back to the elevators, her professional demeanor firmly back in place. She handed him an envelope. "Your advance, Mr. Grant. It's a certified check. The funds are available immediately." He took it, the paper feeling both impossibly light and incredibly heavy. He had the money. He had a chance to save his daughter. But as the elevator doors closed, whisking him away from the 81st floor, he couldn't shake the image of Gregory Ashcroft's cold, predatory smile. He had just made a deal with a billionaire, but he had the distinct and terrifying feeling that he had also just walked into the middle of a war. Thomas didn't go home. He didn't stop for coffee. He walked out of the Davenport Tower with the check clutched in his hand and headed straight for the one place that mattered. He marched back into the hospital, bypassing Cora's room and going directly to the billing department, a place he usually avoided like the plague. The woman behind the counter, a tired-looking administrator named Susan, whom he knew by name, looked up with weary eyes. "Mr. Grant, I don't have any updates for you. I have this," he said, his voice shaking slightly as he slid the certified check under the glass partition. Susan picked it up. Her eyes widened as she read the name on the check, Davenport Foundation, and then the amount. She looked from the check to Thomas, her professional indifference melting into stunned disbelief. "Mr. Grant, is this—" "It's a down payment," he said, the words feeling powerful on his tongue. "For Cora Grant's surgery. Can you get this to Dr. Vance right away? Can you tell her we can schedule it now?" The administrator was speechless for a moment. Then she nodded, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "Yes, of course. I'll process this immediately and notify her office. This is wonderful news." Thomas, hearing his first name, stripped of the formal Mr. Grant, felt like a validation. He wasn't just a delinquent account anymore. He was a father who had come through. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. He mumbled his thanks and practically floated down the hall to Cora's room. She was sitting up, watching a cartoon on the small television mounted to the wall. When she saw him, her face lit up. "Daddy, you're back. Did you go to the big party already?" "Not yet, sweet pea," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. He sat on her bed and took her hand. "But I met the nice lady, and I signed the papers, and the doctor. The doctor is going to get a call very soon. We're going to fix your heart, Cora." She didn't fully understand the logistics, the contracts, or the terrifying numbers. All she understood was the look on her father's face. The deep, weary lines of worry had softened. The constant tension in his shoulders was gone. For the first time in a long time, he looked like he could breathe. She wrapped her small arms around his neck and hugged him tight. "I love you, Daddy. I love you more, my brave girl," he whispered into her hair, holding onto her as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Back on the 81st floor, the atmosphere was arctic. As soon as the doors closed behind Thomas, Gregory Ashcroft turned to Rachel, his charming facade dropping to reveal the cold, calculating man beneath. "A street musician, Rachel?" "Really?" he began, his voice low and dangerous. "What is this? Some new pet project? A bleeding heart whim that's going to make this foundation a laughingstock?" "It's a strategic decision, Gregory," Rachel replied, walking back to her desk and sitting down, creating a barrier of authority between them. "His story is compelling. It will connect with our donors on an emotional level. Donations are driven by emotion, not by sterile performances from a string quartet. His story?" Gregory scoffed, pacing in front of her desk like a caged predator. "What story? That he's down on his luck? The city is full of people who are down on their luck. What makes this one so special? What aren't you telling me?" His eyes narrowed, searching hers for a crack, a flicker of weakness. He knew her. He knew how she thought. This wasn't just a strategic decision. This was personal. He could smell it. "There is nothing to tell," she said, her voice a flat, emotionless wall. "He is a talented musician who will be an asset to our gala. That is all." "Is it?" he purred, leaning his hands on her desk, invading her space. "I've known you since you were a girl, Rachel. I taught you how to read a balance sheet. And I know when you're hiding something. You have a tell. Your jaw gets tight." He pointed a finger at her face. "Just like that." Rachel's eyes flashed with fury. "My only tell, Gregory, is that I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own office. Your concern is noted. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." It was a clear dismissal. Gregory straightened up, a cold smile playing on his lips. He knew he wouldn't get it out of her now, but there were other ways. He had resources. He had a network of people who owed him favors. "Very well," he said smoothly. "I hope for your sake and for the foundation's that your asset doesn't turn out to be a liability." He turned and walked out, the click of the closing door echoing in the silent office. The moment he was gone, Rachel's rigid posture dissolved. She swiveled her chair to face the window, her gaze landing on the distant block of the hospital. Her heart was racing. Gregory was right. She was hiding something, and he was like a shark that had scented blood in the water. He wouldn't stop until he knew the truth. And if he found out, he would twist it, weaponize it, and use it to destroy not only her, but Thomas as well. She buzzed her intercom. "Amelia, come in here, please." The assistant entered, her expression neutral. "I need you to do something for me," Rachel said, her voice low. "It's off the books. Strictly confidential. I want you to find out everything you can about a man named Thomas Grant." Amelia's professional mask didn't slip, but her eyes showed a flicker of surprise. "The musician?" "Yes, I want to know his employment history, his financial situation, his personal life. Everything, especially why he was playing outside the children's hospital. Is his daughter a patient there? What's her condition?" She paused. "I want to be prepared for any potential liabilities, as Gregory so helpfully pointed out." It was a plausible corporate reason, a lie wrapped in the language of risk management. But they both knew it was more than that. "Of course, Miss Davenport," Amelia said. "I'll be discreet." "I know you will," Rachel said, turning back to the window. As Amelia left, Rachel watched the tiny cars moving on the streets below. She had set something in motion she couldn't control. She had reached into the past and pulled a ghost into her world of glass and steel. And now, a hunter was on his trail. She could only hope she could protect him from the fallout that was sure to come. The moment Gregory Ashcroft left Rachel's office, he walked not to his own suite of rooms, but to a small, soundproofed alcove he used for private calls. The smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, predatory focus. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. It was answered on the first ring. "Yes?" a gravelly voice said. No name, no greeting. "It's me," Gregory said. "I have a new target for you. His name is Thomas Grant. He's a musician. I want everything, and I mean everything. I want to know where he buys his coffee, what brand of soap he uses, and every skeleton in his closet, no matter how small. I have a feeling our dear Miss Davenport has taken a special, personal interest in him. Find out why personal interest files cost more," the voice grunted. "I am aware," Gregory said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Find the connection between them. I don't care if you have to go back 30 years. Find it." He ended the call without waiting for a reply and stared out the window, a cruel sense of satisfaction settling over him. He had just lit a fuse, and he couldn't wait to watch the explosion. 2 days later, Thomas was sitting by Cora's bedside, helping her with a puzzle, when his phone rang. It was Dr. Vance. His heart immediately started to pound. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice warm and professional. "The hospital's board has reviewed your account. The initial payment has been processed, and we have an opening in the surgical schedule. We can admit Cora for pre-op next Tuesday." With the procedure scheduled for Wednesday morning, Thomas choked on his breath. It was real. It was happening. "Next week? So soon?" "There was a cancellation. It's a perfect window for us." "Is that acceptable?" "Acceptable," he laughed, a sound that was half sob, half gasp of pure joy. "Dr. Vance, that is the best news I have ever heard in my entire life. Yes, that is... Thank you. Thank you." When he hung up, Cora was looking at him, her head tilted. "Was that the doctor?" He nodded, unable to speak, the tears he'd been holding back finally spilling over, hot and fast. He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her shoulder. "They're going to do it, Cora," he whispered. "They're going to fix your heart." Next week, she hugged him back, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Does that mean you won't have to play the violin in the cold anymore?" The simple, innocent question struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had been so focused on the money, on the surgery, he hadn't let himself think past it. He hadn't realized just how much she saw, how much she understood of his silent struggle. "That's right, sweet pea," he said, his voice thick. "No more playing in the cold." The file landed on Rachel's desk with a soft, definitive thud. Amelia stood before her, her expression perfectly neutral. "You were right, Miss Davenport," Amelia began, her voice low. "His daughter, Cora Grant, is 8 years old. She's a long-term patient at the Children's Hospital. Diagnosis is a congenital heart defect. She's been on the surgical list for over a year, but the procedure was on hold due to lack of funds. He's a widower. His wife passed away 6 years ago. He works nights as a janitor for a commercial cleaning service. Their main contract is the Ashcroft Tower, ironically. He has no other family in the city. Just him and the girl. Each word was a hammer blow to Rachel's carefully constructed composure. It was worse than she imagined. The desperation she'd seen in his eyes that day wasn't just about poverty. It was about mortality. It was the same desperation she remembered seeing in her own father's eyes all those years ago. "And the surgery?" Rachel asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I took the liberty of making a discreet inquiry with the hospital's foundation liaison," Amelia said. "A down payment of $10,000 was made to the patient's account 2 days ago. The surgery has been scheduled for next Wednesday." Rachel closed her eyes. Relief and terror warred within her. She had saved him. She had given him the one thing he needed in the world. But in doing so, she had tied herself to him, creating a connection that Gregory was now hunting with relentless precision. "Thank you, Amelia. That will be all." Once she was alone, Rachel swiveled in her chair and stared at the city. She had the facts, but the facts didn't explain the real mystery. Why him? Why, out of all the musicians in the world, did it have to be him? And why did the sound of his violin feel like a key turning in a lock deep inside her soul? She needed to see him again, not as a CEO or a benefactor, but as something else. She needed a reason, a pretext. "Amelia," she said into the intercom, "schedule a meeting with Mr. Grant for tomorrow afternoon. A music consultation for the gala. Book the small auditorium at the Foundation building." The Davenport Foundation building was a world away from the corporate tower. It was older, built of warm brick and glass, with a quiet, academic feel. Thomas arrived clutching his violin case, feeling less like an intruder and more like a student. He was led to a small, beautiful auditorium with perfect acoustics and a single grand piano on the stage. Rachel was already there, standing in the center of the stage, looking smaller and less intimidating without her desk as a shield. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice softer here. "Thank you for coming?" "Of course," he said. "Dr. Vance called. The surgery is scheduled? I don't have the words to thank you." "You just did," she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "With your music. That's all the thanks I need." She gestured to the empty seats. "The gala will be held in a much larger space, of course. We need to ensure the piece you play has the right impact. Tell me about the song, the one you played on the street. It's an unusual melody." "It was my mother's," he said, the words coming easily now, his gratitude overriding his nervousness. "She used to hum it to me when I was a kid. It's not famous or anything, just something she remembered from her own childhood." Rachel froze, her professional mask slipping for just a fraction of a second. "Your mother's?" "Yeah, she said it always made her feel safe." Thomas continued, lost in the memory. "I started playing it for Cora for the same reason." Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. A lullaby, passed down from a mother to her son. It was too close. The coincidence was too sharp, too painful. She felt an almost overwhelming urge to ask him, to say the name of the small, forgotten town where she'd last heard that song. Silver Creek. But before she could speak, her phone vibrated with an urgent summons from her office. The moment was broken. "I have to take this," she said, her voice strained. "We'll continue this another time." As she walked away, her mind was reeling. It wasn't just the song. It was the feeling behind it. Safety, hope. The very things her own mother had craved in her final days. The very things that long-lost 12-year-old boy had given her. A sad little girl, with his kindness and his music. The connection was no longer a ghost. It was a living, breathing thing. And it was terrifying. That same evening, Gregory Ashcroft sat in his penthouse, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. His phone rang. It was his investigator. "You were right," the gravelly voice said. This guy's life is an open book of debt and desperation. Nothing juicy until I did what you said. I went back, and Gregory prompted, his voice tight with anticipation. And 23 years ago, the Davenports lived in a small, dead-end town called Silver Creek for 1 year. Public records are spotty, but I pulled property deeds. And guess who their next-door neighbors were? Gregory leaned forward, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. The Grants, the investigator said, a family with a 12-year-old son. Name of Thomas Gregory let out a low laugh. He had found it, the secret, the weakness, the personal connection he knew had to exist. It wasn't just a street musician. It was a ghost from her past. And now he had a name, a time, and a place. He had the weapon he needed. The next few days were a blur of fragile hope. Tuesday morning arrived, crisp and clear, feeling like the first day of a new life. Thomas walked into the hospital not with the weight of the world on his shoulders, but with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He held Cora's small hand as they walked to the admissions desk, her little suitcase filled with her favorite pajamas and a worn teddy bear trailing behind them. She was being admitted for pre-op observation. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. It was finally, terrifyingly real. "Are you scared, Daddy?" Cora asked, her voice small as a nurse checked her vitals. "No, sweet pea," he lied, forcing a smile. "I'm excited, because after this is all over, we're going to go to the beach. We're going to run and build sandcastles, and you won't get tired at all." Her eyes lit up at the thought, and his heart ached with the fierce, protective love he had for her. This was all for her. Every sleepless night, every frozen fingertip, every humiliating moment of his life was a small price for this one chance. His phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he now recognized. "Thinking of you and Cora today. Let me know if you need anything at all. R.D." He smiled. A simple message, but it felt like an anchor. Over the past week, they had spoken a few times. Brief, professional calls to discuss the gala performance. But beneath the surface of the conversations, something else was growing. A quiet understanding, a shared gentleness. He never felt like a project or a charity case when he spoke to her. He just felt seen. He texted back a simple reply. "Thank you. It means more than you know." He was sitting in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, watching Cora sleep when he first noticed it. A nurse he recognized walked past the open door, glanced in, and then quickly looked away, her expression unreadable. A few minutes later, an orderly pushing a cart did the same thing. It was a subtle shift, a sudden awareness that he was being watched. He brushed it off as paranoia. His nerves were shot, that's all. Then he heard it. A television was on at the nurse's station down the hall, the volume low, but the newscaster's voice sharp and urgent. "A bombshell report this morning is raising serious questions about the ethical practices of the Davenport Foundation and its celebrated CEO, Rachel Davenport." Thomas frowned, his attention snagged. He stood up and walked quietly toward the doorway of Cora's room. He could see the screen. His own face stared back at him. A grainy photo someone had clearly taken with a phone while he was playing on the street. Next to it was a sleek, corporate headshot of Rachel. The headline blared at the bottom of the screen, "Charity or Secret Payoff." His blood ran cold. The reporter's voice was slick with insinuation. "Sources have revealed that the foundation's newly hired gala performer, a street musician and part-time janitor named Thomas Grant, is not a stranger to the Billionaire CEO. In fact, records show that 23 years ago, in the small town of Silver Creek, Rachel Davenport and Thomas Grant were childhood neighbors. Silver Creek. The name hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't thought of that place in decades. He remembered a sad, quiet girl with dark eyes. Rachel. Little Rachel Davenport? It couldn't be. The woman who had hired him, the powerful, elegant CEO, couldn't possibly be the same person. The report continued, each word a carefully aimed dart. It mentioned his financial struggles, Cora's illness, the sudden and exorbitant contract he'd received. It painted a picture of a desperate man preying on the past of a powerful woman and a powerful woman using a charitable foundation to funnel money to an old flame. It was a lie, a disgusting, twisted lie, but it was crafted so cleverly, weaving just enough truth into the fiction to make it sound plausible. His hands started to tremble. People were staring at him now. The whispers were no longer in his head. He backed into Cora's room, his heart pounding a sick, frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was Gregory Ashcroft's doing. He knew it instantly. The cold threat in the man's eyes, the possessive way he'd looked at Rachel. This was his revenge. Just then, Dr. Vance appeared at the door. The warmth was gone from her eyes, replaced by a look of profound, professional regret. "Thomas," she said, using his first name, but this time it didn't feel like a validation. It felt like a prelude to a blow. "Can I speak with you in the hallway for a moment?" He followed her out, his legs feeling like lead. "What's going on?" he asked, though he already knew. "There's been a development," she said, avoiding his gaze. "The hospital's board of directors just held an emergency meeting. This news report, the allegations against Ms. Davenport and the foundation, the hospital cannot afford to be associated with a public scandal of this nature. It compromises our integrity and our donors." "But it's not true," he whispered, his voice cracking. "None of it is true." "I know," she said, and he could see she genuinely meant it. "But the board isn't concerned with the truth right now. They're concerned with perception. And the perception is toxic." She finally looked at him, her eyes full of pity, and delivered the final, devastating blow. "They've instructed me to postpone Cora's surgery indefinitely. The word was a death sentence. It echoed in the silent, sterile hallway. The hope that had filled him just an hour ago evaporated, leaving a cold, black void. His miracle, his one chance, was gone. Snatched away by a man he barely knew, for reasons he couldn't comprehend. All he knew was that his daughter, sleeping peacefully just a few feet away, was now closer to death because of it. Miles away, in her silent, 80-floor office, Rachel stared at the same news report on her computer screen. Her face was a mask of ice, but inside, a storm of fury was raging. She saw Gregory's fingerprints all over the poisoned article. The language, the timing, the sheer, calculated cruelty of it. He hadn't just attacked her. He had aimed his weapon at an innocent, sick child to get to her. He had taken Thomas's private pain and turned it into a public spectacle. Her intercom buzzed. It was Amelia. "Ms. Davenport, the hospital is on line 1. It's the chairman of the board. He's furious." Rachel didn't answer. She stood up, her movements stiff with rage. She knew what the call was about. She knew what they had done. She grabbed her coat from the stand by the door, her mind racing. Gregory thought he had her cornered. He thought he could control her with fear and scandal. He had forgotten who she was. He had forgotten the little girl from Silver Creek who had learned to survive in the face of absolute loss. "Cancel my appointments," she said, her voice a low, dangerous command. "All of them." She walked out of her office, her stride long and purposeful. She had to find Thomas. She had to get to him before he thought she had betrayed him. She had to explain a past she had kept buried for 23 years, and she had to do it before the lies destroyed them all. The drive to the hospital was a blur of rain-streaked glass and the angry glare of traffic lights. Rachel sat in the back of her limousine, her hands clenched into fists in her lap, her face a pale, determined mask. Her phone was buzzing incessantly on the seat beside her. Calls from her board, her PR team, the chairman of the hospital. She ignored them all. They were just noise. The only thing that mattered was the quiet, devastated man she was racing toward, and the little girl whose life was now hanging by a thread woven from their shared past. As the car pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, she saw the first vultures circling. A news van was parked across the street, a reporter already setting up a camera. Gregory had worked fast. He hadn't just planted a story. He had started a fire. She bypassed the main lobby, using her foundation access card to enter through a quieter side entrance. The atmosphere inside was thick with tension. The usual calm hum of the pediatric ward was gone, replaced by hushed conversations and pointed stares. As she walked down the hall, nurses and staff recognized her, their faces a mixture of awe, suspicion, and pity. She felt their eyes on her back, the whispers following her like a shadow. She found him standing in the hallway just outside Cora's room, staring blankly at a cheerful mural of cartoon animals on the wall. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. His shoulders were slumped, the fight gone from his posture, replaced by a profound and terrible emptiness. "Thomas," she said, her voice soft. He turned slowly, and when his eyes met hers, they were filled with a chaotic storm of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, and a raw, bottomless pain. "You?" he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Is it true? The part about Silver Creek?" she asked, her heart aching at the look on his face. "Yes, the rest of it. The rest is a lie, a weapon designed to destroy us." He let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Silver Creek. I've been racking my brain. Little Rachel Davenport, the quiet girl with the sad eyes who lived in the house with the broken fence." He shook his head, a look of dawning, horrified disbelief on his face. "All this time, you knew. You knew who I was from the very first moment." "Yes," she admitted, her own voice trembling slightly. "I knew." "And you said nothing?" he demanded, taking a step closer, his voice rising with anger and hurt. "You hired me. You gave me this false hope. You let me believe I was just a musician you'd found on the street. Why? Was this some kind of game to you? A charity project for the poor boy you left behind?" "No," she said, the words sharp and immediate. "It wasn't like that. I saw you, and I froze. 23 years, Thomas. For 23 years I buried that place. I buried my mother, that house, that entire year of my life. And then I heard that song, and it all came rushing back. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how, so you said nothing," he repeated, the accusation hanging between them, heavy and suffocating. "You played God. You came into my life with your money and your power, and you didn't think I had the right to know the truth." "I was afraid," she confessed, her corporate armor finally cracking, revealing the vulnerable woman beneath. "Afraid of what it would mean. Afraid of this exact thing happening." "Well, it happened," he shot back, his voice cracking. He gestured wildly down the hall. "It's all over the news. They're calling me a fraud. A con artist who used an old sob story to trick you. And the hospital, Rachel, they canceled her surgery." The last words were a choked sob, the fight in him finally breaking, leaving only despair. He leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. "They're letting her die because of this." "No," Rachel said, her voice now a blade of cold steel. "They are not." She stepped closer, her own fear and guilt transmuting into a white-hot fury. "This isn't the hospital's fault. This is one man, Gregory Ashcroft. He's on my board. He wants to destroy me, to take my company. He found out about you, about Silver Creek, and he's using you. He's using Cora Thomas," stared at her, the pieces finally clicking into place. He remembered the cold, possessive glare of the man in her office, the veiled threats. This wasn't random. This was a targeted attack. "He is a monster if he'd do this to a child," Thomas whispered, horrified. "He is," Rachel agreed. "And the only way to fight a monster is to drag him into the light." She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "I will not let him win. Thomas, I swear to you on my mother's memory, Cora will have her surgery. I will fix this. I don't know how yet, but I will tear down anyone who stands in our way." Her promise was so fierce, so absolute, that it cut through his despair, leaving a sliver of something he hadn't felt in hours. Fight. He was no longer just a victim. He was in the eye of the storm with her. Before he could respond, her phone, which she'd been holding in a white-knuckled grip, buzzed with a text from an unlisted number. She glanced down at the screen. Her blood ran cold. The message contained only a few chilling words. "Memories can be so expensive, especially when they cost a child's life. Be careful who you trust, Rachel. Not all ghosts from Silver Creek want to help you." The threat was clear, cold, and utterly terrifying. Gregory wasn't just attacking their reputations. He was isolating them, trying to poison the fragile trust that was just beginning to form between them. He was telling her he knew everything and that he was willing to burn the whole world down, starting with an 8-year-old girl in a hospital bed. Rachel's hand was shaking as she held out the phone for Thomas to see. The words on the screen glowed with a cold, malevolent light, seeming to suck the very air from the sterile hospital hallway. Thomas leaned in, his eyes scanning the message once, then twice. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a stark, chilling fear that was not for himself. "He's threatening you," Thomas said, his voice a low, horrified whisper. The anonymous, unlisted number, the veiled reference to Silver Creek. It was a direct shot at her, using his life, and Cora's, as the ammunition. In that instant, his personal sense of betrayal evaporated, burned away by the terrifying realization that they were both trapped in the same predator's crosshairs. She wasn't a god playing with his life. She was another target. "He's trying to drive a wedge between us," Rachel said, her voice tight, pulling the phone back as if the words might physically harm him. "He wants you to think I'm dangerous, that my past is a liability that will get your daughter killed. He wants me isolated. We need to go somewhere private," Thomas said, his janitor's instincts kicking in. They were exposed, standing in a public corridor where anyone could be watching or listening. He glanced at Cora's room, a fierce, protective instinct surging through him. "We can't talk here." He led her to a small, empty family waiting room at the end of the hall, the kind of place meant for quiet grief or anxious hope. He shut the door behind them, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. The room was small, with faded floral chairs and a window that looked out onto a rain-slicked courtyard. For a moment, they just stood there, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were two strangers, bound by a ghost from a shared past, now facing a very real monster in the present. "Why?" Thomas asked, the question raw and simple. "Why does he hate you this much?" Rachel sank into one of the chairs, her long overdue exhaustion finally showing on her face. "Gregory was my father's business partner," she began, her voice low and weary. "When I was young, he was like an uncle to me. After my father passed away and I took over the company, he was my mentor. He taught me everything. But I was better. I saw opportunities he missed. I took risks he was afraid of. The company grew beyond anything he or my father had ever imagined." She looked up at him, her eyes shadowed with old pain. He couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand that the little girl he'd mentored had surpassed him. His pride. It curdled into something ugly. He started to see me not as a protege, but as a rival who had stolen his legacy. "This isn't about business, Thomas. It's about a bitter old man, trying to burn down a kingdom because he can no longer be its king." Thomas listened, his heart aching for the woman in front of him. He saw past the billionaire CEO to the lonely, brilliant woman who had been fighting this silent war for years. He felt a surge of helplessness, a janitor and a street musician against a vindictive corporate titan. "What can we possibly do?" "He has all the power, no," Rachel said, a spark of defiance returning to her eyes. "He has influence. He has a rule book he thinks everyone plays by. But he's forgotten that I know how to fight outside the boardroom." She stood up, pacing the small room like a caged lioness. "That text message was a mistake. It's proof of malicious intent. It's tangible." She paused, looking at him. "You said he was in my office the other day." "That you saw him," Thomas nodded. "Yeah, he was waiting for you. He looked smug, like he'd already won." He hesitated, a memory flickering at the edge of his mind, something he'd seen 100 times but never paid attention to. "He takes a lot of late-night meetings, in his office at the Ashcroft Tower. I'm usually cleaning the executive floor around then." Rachel stopped pacing. "Meetings with who?" "I don't know. But there's one guy who comes often, a reporter. I've seen his press badge. His name is Silas Croft. He's one of those guys who writes attack piece articles." Thomas's eyes widened as the connection snapped into place. I've seen papers on Gregory's desk, drafts. He leaves them out sometimes. He's arrogant. He probably thinks the janitor is invisible." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Rachel's face. It was the breakthrough she needed. "He doesn't have a source," she whispered, the plan forming in her mind. "He has a co-conspirator. A paid attack dog." She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't call her lawyers or her PR team. She called Amelia. "Amelia," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I have a name for you. Silas Croft, a journalist. I need everything you can find on him. Financial records, phone logs, his recent articles. I want to know every connection he has to Gregory Ashcroft. This is priority 1, and it is completely off the books. Use the private firm we keep on retainer. I don't care what it costs." She ended the call and turned back to Thomas, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. The fear was gone, replaced by cold, calculated fury. "Now for the hospital." She found the number for the hospital's chairman of the board, a man named Alistair Finch, and dialed. She put the call on speakerphone so Thomas could hear. It was answered on the second ring. "Alistair," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Rachel." The chairman's voice was flustered, defensive. "I was just about to call you. This is a terrible situation. You must understand our position." "I understand your position perfectly." Rachel cut him off, her tone like ice. "You canceled a child's life-saving surgery based on a libelous, unverified news report. A report that my team is, as we speak, proving was a paid and malicious corporate attack." She let the words hang in the air for a beat. "When the real story breaks, Alistair, and I assure you, it will break before the end of the day. The world will see this for what it is. A powerful man tried to destroy a competitor by threatening the life of an 8-year-old girl. And when that happens, do you want your hospital's name in the headline as his accomplice, or as the institution that stood for its patients? You made a decision based on fear. I'm giving you one chance to make a decision based on courage." There was stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You have 1 hour to call Dr. Vance and tell her that Cora Grant's surgery is back on the schedule for tomorrow morning, as planned," Rachel continued, her voice a lethal whisper. "If I do not receive confirmation that the surgery is proceeding, my next call will be to every major news network in this country, and the story won't be about me anymore. It will be about the cowardice of your board. The choice is yours." She ended the call, plunging the small room into silence. She was breathing heavily, the adrenaline of the confrontation coursing through her. Thomas stared at her, utterly speechless. He had just witnessed the full, terrifying force of Rachel Davenport. She wasn't just a woman who had survived a storm. She was the storm. And for the first time since he'd heard the word indefinitely, he felt a surge of wild, impossible hope. They were no longer victims waiting for a verdict. They had just thrown the first stone. The silence that followed Rachel's phone call was a living thing, a thick, humming tension that filled every corner of the small waiting room. Thomas stared at her, his mind struggling to process the sheer force of will he had just witnessed. She had faced down a powerful man, a hospital board, and the crushing weight of a public scandal with nothing but the conviction in her voice. For the first time, he saw the source of her power. It wasn't just her money or her name. It was a core of unbending steel, forged in a past he was only just beginning to understand. They didn't speak. There were no words for the moment. They were suspended in a fragile bubble of time, waiting for a verdict that would either save a life or shatter it completely. Thomas found himself pacing the tiny room, his hands stuffed in his pockets to keep them from shaking. Rachel sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the door, a general watching a battlefield, waiting for a signal. Every footstep in the hallway, every distant beep of a machine, sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through him. 47 minutes passed. It felt like a lifetime. He was on the verge of breaking, of convincing himself it hadn't worked, that her threat had been an empty bluff, when his phone vibrated in his pocket. The screen lit up with Dr. Vance's name. His breath caught in his throat. He fumbled with the phone, his thumbs swiping uselessly at the screen before he finally managed to answer. "Hello?" he croaked. "Thomas?" Dr. Vance's voice came through the line, and the change in her tone was startling. The strained professionalism was gone, replaced by a warmth that sounded like pure, unadulterated relief. I have wonderful news. The board has reversed its decision. Cora's surgery is back on the schedule. We're proceeding tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., as originally planned. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Thomas's feet. The words washed over him, a tidal wave of relief so powerful it buckled his knees. He sank into the chair opposite Rachel, the phone slipping from his grasp. A ragged sob escaped his lips, a sound torn from the deepest part of his soul, a release of all the fear and despair he had carried for years. Tears streamed down his face, hot and unchecked. He didn't try to stop them. He felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. He looked up through blurred eyes to see Rachel kneeling in front of him. Her own eyes were shining with unshed tears, her carefully maintained composure finally broken. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say anything. She just placed her hand over his, her touch a quiet anchor in his storm of emotion. She stayed with him. As the afternoon bled into evening, she never left his side. She sent Amelia a text to have food delivered, and they ate in silence in Cora's room, watching the little girl sleep, blissfully unaware of the war that had just been waged for her life. The animosity between them, born of secrets and suspicion, had been burned away in the crucible of the day's crisis. What was left was something quieter, deeper, a fragile, unspoken connection. That night, as the hospital quieted down and the lights were dimmed, they sat in the semi-darkness of the waiting room again. "Tell me about her," Rachel said softly, breaking the long silence. "Your wife." Thomas took a deep breath. Her name was Clara. She was everything, the kind of person who made you feel like you were the only one in the room. We met in college. I was going to be an architect. She was a musician, a cellist. She's the one who gave me this violin. He gestured to the case resting against the wall. She got sick so fast. One day she was fine, the next, the doctors said it was aggressive. We spent everything we had, everything we could borrow. But it wasn't enough. I lost her, and I was left with a mountain of debt and a beautiful little girl who looked just like her. "I'm so sorry," Rachel whispered. "Don't be," he said, shaking his head. "I have Cora. She's the best part of both of us." He looked at her then, his gaze direct. "What about you? You never married." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "I never made time," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "The company became my life. It was the only thing my father left me, the only way I knew how to keep him with me. And after what happened with my mother, I think I learned to build walls instead of bridges. It felt safer until the boy with the violin showed up again," he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "You remember me more than I thought." "I remember a little girl who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world," he said. "I remember you'd sit on your porch and listen while I practiced. You never said much, but you always listened." The next morning came too quickly. The walk to the surgical ward was the longest of Thomas's life. Cora was brave, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes wide but trusting. He kissed her forehead before they wheeled her through the double doors, whispering, "I'll see you in a little while, sweet pea. I love you." And then she was gone. The waiting began. He and Rachel sat in the surgical waiting room, a sterile, impersonal space where time seemed to slow to a crawl. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. He couldn't sit still. He paced. He stared out the window. He read the same page of a magazine a dozen times without absorbing a word. Rachel remained calm, a silent, steady presence beside him. About 2 hours into the surgery, her phone buzzed with a discreet notification. He saw her open a file, her expression shifting, hardening into one of cold, focused intensity. "What is it?" he asked. "It's from Amelia," she said, turning the screen so he could see. It was a series of bank statements. They showed 3 large, untraceable wire transfers from a shell corporation to the personal account of Silas Croft. The shell corporation, Amelia had noted, was owned by another shell corporation, but the paper trail ultimately led back to a private investment fund managed by one person, Gregory Ashcroft. "The smoking gun," Thomas breathed. More than that, Rachel said, scrolling down. Amelia found something else. Silas Croft was in debt. Deeply. Gambling. Gregory didn't just pay him for an article. He bought him. This isn't journalism. It's a conspiracy. They had him. The proof was right there, cold and irrefutable. But the victory felt hollow. The only thing that mattered was behind those double doors. Another 3 hours crawled by. Finally, the doors swung open. Dr. Vance walked toward them, her face tired but calm. Thomas's heart stopped. The procedure was complex, she began, and his stomach plummeted. But it was a complete success. We were able to repair the defect. She's a fighter. She's stable and is being moved to recovery. Thomas heard the words, but they didn't register at first. He just stared at her, his mind blank. "Did you hear that, Thomas?" Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion as she grabbed his arm. "She's okay. Cora's going to be okay." That's when it hit him. A wave of relief so profound, so all-encompassing, that his legs gave out. He stumbled, and Rachel caught him. He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with convulsive sobs, not of grief this time, but of a joy so intense it was painful. She held onto him, her arms wrapped around him, and for the first time, in the cold, sterile waiting room of a hospital, Thomas Grant didn't feel like he was alone in the world. The weeks that followed the surgery were a time of quiet miracles. Thomas watched with a sense of breathless wonder as color returned to Cora's cheeks. Her breathing, once a shallow, labored effort, became deep and easy. The tired, pained look that had lived in her eyes for so long was replaced by a bright, mischievous sparkle he hadn't seen since she was a toddler. For the first time in his life, Thomas could look at his daughter and see a future unclouded by fear. Rachel was a constant, gentle presence during those days of recovery. She would arrive at the hospital after her long days at the office, not as a billionaire benefactor, but as a friend. She brought Cora coloring books and puzzles, and she brought Thomas coffee and a willingness to listen. They would sit together in the quiet of the hospital room, watching Cora sleep, and they would talk. They talked about everything and nothing, about music, about architecture, about their favorite childhood memories from a small, forgotten town. One afternoon, Cora, who was sitting up in bed and weaving a friendship bracelet, looked at Rachel with the frank, unfiltered curiosity of an 8-year-old. "Are you going to be my dad's girlfriend?" she asked. Thomas nearly choked on his coffee. Rachel, to her credit, didn't flinch. A soft, genuine smile touched her lips. "Well," she said, her eyes meeting Thomas's over Cora's head, "I think your dad is a very special person." We'll have to see the unspoken answer hung in the air between them, a promise of a future that suddenly felt not just possible, but inevitable. The night of the Davenport Foundation Gala arrived. The grand ballroom was a glittering spectacle of crystal chandeliers and elegantly dressed guests. The city's wealthiest and most powerful gathered under one roof. Backstage, in a small, private dressing room, Thomas stood in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a gift from Rachel, feeling like an imposter. He stared at his reflection, turning the worn, familiar weight of his violin in his hands. He wasn't a janitor tonight. He wasn't a street musician. He was a performer. More than that, he was a father whose daughter was alive and thriving because of the woman who was about to walk on that stage. The door opened and Rachel stepped in. She was breathtaking in a deep sapphire gown, her hair swept up, her usual corporate armor replaced by a radiant, confident grace. "You look terrified," she said, her voice a soft tease. "I am," he admitted, his heart pounding. "What if I'm not good enough?" She walked over to him and gently adjusted his bow tie, her fingers brushing against his neck. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through him. "You were always good enough, Thomas," she said, her eyes searching his. "The world just wasn't listening." She leaned in and pressed a soft, fleeting kiss to his cheek. "This isn't about being perfect. It's about being true. Just play from your heart. That's all you've ever done." He watched her walk onto the stage. A hush fell over the crowd. In the front row, he saw Gregory Ashcroft, seated at the head table, looking smug and untouchable. He had weathered the initial storm, confident that the scandal would fade, that Rachel's threats were nothing more than empty words. "Good evening," Rachel began, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the vast hall. "Tonight, we are here to raise money for those in need. But before we do, I want to tell you a story. It's a story about a little girl who was lost and a kind boy who found her with his music." She told them about Silver Creek. She spoke of her mother's illness, of her family's poverty, of the quiet, lonely despair of that year. And she spoke of a boy next door who played his violin every day, whose melodies were the only comfort she had. The room was utterly silent, captivated. Gregory's smile faltered, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "That boy's music was a gift," Rachel continued, her gaze sweeping across the audience before landing, with pinpoint accuracy, on Gregory. "A gift given with no expectation of reward. Recently I was given another gift, the gift of proof. Proof that some people in this world don't offer gifts, they only set traps." And then, on the enormous screens behind her, the evidence appeared. Bank statements, wire transfers from Gregory's shell corporations, emails between him and Silas Croft, outlining the plan to fabricate the story, to use a sick child as a pawn in a corporate takeover. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Gregory's face went white with shock and rage. "The man you are about to hear perform tonight was the target of this vicious attack," Rachel declared, her voice ringing with righteous fury. "His daughter's life-saving surgery was canceled because of these lies. This wasn't a corporate maneuver. This was an act of monstrous cruelty. And it ends tonight." She gestured to the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, a man of true talent, and more importantly, of true heart. Mr. Thomas Grant." As security discreetly escorted a sputtering, defeated Gregory Ashcroft from the room, Thomas walked into the spotlight. He didn't look at the shocked faces of the city's elite. He looked at Rachel, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He lifted the violin to his chin, took a deep breath, and began to play. He played the lullaby. The melody filled the silent hall, no longer a song of desperation played on a cold street corner, but a soaring anthem of love, gratitude, and triumph. It was a song for Clara. It was a song for his mother. It was a song for Cora, who was sleeping safely in her own bed for the first time in months. And it was a song for Rachel, the little girl who had listened from her porch, and the incredible woman who had saved them all. 3 months later, the sun was warm on their faces, the sound of the ocean a gentle roar. Cora, her energy boundless, ran along the shoreline, chasing sandpipers, her laughter carried on the salty breeze. Thomas watched her, his heart so full he thought it might burst. This was the dream. This was the promise he had made to her in the dark of a hospital room, and it was real. He felt a hand slip into his. He turned to find Rachel standing beside him, her eyes sparkling, a genuine, joyful smile on her face. "She looks happy," Rachel said. "We both are," he replied, squeezing her hand. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the little girl who was the center of their universe. The scandal had faded. Gregory was facing legal action, and the Davenport Foundation was more respected than ever. But none of that mattered here on this beach. "I never properly thanked you," Thomas said, turning to face her. "For everything." "You did," she said softly. "You taught me how to listen to the music again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. He opened it to reveal a modest, elegant ring. He hadn't bought it with her money. He had sold a few of his architectural sketches from college, pieces of his old dream, to pay for this new one. "I know it's fast," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know our lives are worlds apart. But when I'm with you and with Cora, I don't feel like a janitor or a musician. I just feel home. Rachel Davenport, will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes. The happy kind. She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. And she leaned in and kissed him, a kiss filled with the promise of a future built not on fairy tales or grand gestures, but on the simple, quiet miracle of two lost souls finding their way back to each other, guided by the echoes of an old song.